Okay, so I could keep going with refined paint with my customized brush the way I've been going. And I know that the areas I still need to do, the head basically gives me, just like any kind of dog and their coat of fur, if I finish it off in one area, the light fur, the dark fur, I kind of know what the palette is and what the effects will be in other areas. But if I'm just using refined paint in the same way and stealing colors and layering them and blending them, it's going to take a long time to get all this coverage, even if I'm using a larger brush, which I am. So what can we use from compositing, now that we've controlled the focal points, to kind of speed this along? Well, as long as you know what your base paint layer is and what your refined paint layer is, I can now do this. This is kind of optional. Just like we did when we were compositing our creature, I can take chunks of all of these pixels that I made, duplicate them, Command J, and then move them to other parts of the painting. All right, so where might this be helpful? Down here. And then I'm going to stretch it with Transform and Shift, and then I can warp it to kind of fill the space. So these are the kind of things you can do in digital paint that you can't do with traditional. And they're still all my own pixels. They're just warped and distorted from a different part. Then I can take another chunk. I still keep them all on separate layers until I'm happy with them, and then I can merge them all into one refined paint layer. Then I take this big chunk, duplicate it, move it down, and use it on the kind of wrist seam here. And warp it. And stretch it up and around. Right. So that's one thing I can do. Another thing I can do is I can use direct adjustments on those duplicates, right? And I can play with brightening them a little bit or darkening their midtones based on what's needed. Usually I would just play with the slider, but remember it's all at a fairly low opacity. It's only at 60%. The other thing I can do is I can use clone stamp. So I'm going to set clone stamp to do all layers, right? I'm going to make it a nice big brush. Clone stamp is on a different brush than my others. I can even use my brush for it. I would just need to set the brush settings, but that's not going to matter so much for clone stamp. So make it a little bit smaller. And I can do it at a lower opacity. So now I can hold down Option here and then paint those in on this other layer up here. And start and stop it, just like I use clone stamp in our compositing creature assignment, assignment 2, to fill in holes from composited photos. Now these pixels are from our own brush strokes. So this is just going to give me that kind of complexity of texture. And what I'm painting with are all of my multicolored pixels, just by clone stamping. And I can always see in the navigator kind of how that whole image is coming together. And I can always tell if I'm going too far, right? Because my base color is going to kind of keep me honest about the textures. So I have the orange fur here. It might not be in the right direction, but at least it will give me all of those kind of colors and textures to work with. And because it's only at 73% opacity, it's not obliterating all the pixels, right? So I don't do this just anywhere. I do this outside of the focal points, just to speed the process along. This is a concept as a concept artist for certain projects, you have to find ways to kind of speed yourself up. And so whenever you feel like you're stuck just doing the same thing you've already done somewhere else, consider clone stamping or consider compositing from your own work, internal compositing. Now, if there's details like claws or teeth or something that's really unique, you're going to want to do most of that by hand. But this is a way of building up some nice refinement. Okay, so now I've got a lot more down there than I had before. Even going to get a little bit of this in the orange of the paw here. And maybe here as well. Maybe you got to hold down Option. It's good review to target where you want to clone stamp from, and then you build it on top. Okay, so now this is what I've got. You can see how that doesn't feel as nicely painted as this. But if I turn off my base color, now I've got a lot more of it covered. And that is pretty darn helpful. So, how do I finish it off? Well, I'm going to bring these refined paint layers in, maybe underneath. There we go. And I'm going to merge them all together. So these were the composited layers here. This one is a little clunky. So I'm going to clone stamp that a little bit more just to soften that edge. Okay, so now I'm going to select all three, and then I say Layer Merge Layers. So now my refined paint layer is all of that. You'll notice that the base paint or the base color is still necessary, and it fills in the gaps. And now I just continue with refined painting to finish it off, to fill in the gaps. So back to my brush, back to the 60%. This is the brush tool, not the clone stamp tool. And now I'm painting on top, but now I've got all those colors. I don't need to work so hard to build up the texture like I did in the head and in the focal points. And that falls under kind of the work smarter, not harder advantages of digital. It still gives you full control of everything. In traditional painting, there's lots of things like that too. Like putting down one base color and then putting down a secondary color and then sanding between them or scraping between them to blend and give you immediate texture that then you can do more refined paint on top of. So you are free to experiment. But I do want you to experiment with your own strokes, your own brushes. You can use other people's brushes, but what I don't want to see is what you'll learn just looking at kind of YouTube tutorials for digital painting from photo reference, which is just using rotoscoping and just copying exactly from the layers underneath. That just looks like a dead painting. There's nothing really interesting there that an AI filter couldn't do just as well. And question of the day 4 is all about the validity, right? And the challenges to the validity of digital imagery and digital art, especially when we have AI generative technology that can do so much of it. We want to really understand the intention and the purpose of the aesthetics in what we make. It shouldn't feel arbitrary, which AI art often does, because it is. But there's nothing wrong with starting with something more arbitrary and then customizing it to your purpose. And that's what digital painting allows for. A really good technique to learn before we do our final projects. A big part of painting is controlling your edges, so kind of pay attention to those, how they transition, if they're soft or if they're hard. If you want a really clean edge, but you want to stay on your custom brush, that's sometimes when you want to use the lasso and just select something and delete. I don't think the eraser is a very helpful tool in digital painting. It's better just to paint another color around it, but when it's the edge, you want to kind of avoid it completely. Let's get some of that green in there. These browns. And in refined paint, you're going to find that you're like overstating things a lot, like just painting right over the top pretty dark, but because you're at a lower opacity, remember that even those are being blended. And it's just giving, if I start zooming in, you'll see that the paint texture is starting to get a lot more interesting. And where it looks boring, it's just the base color coming through. You just want to work it up. And with those textured brushes, it feels very much like it's on canvas or on paper. It's easier to soften edges than it is to sharpen edges in a computer. So I like to go a little bit messier and more jagged, and then we can always use the blur tool or the smudge tool to soften. So I should show you that. If you're just getting a lot of marks and you don't know how to blend them smooth. There's not a lot of smoothness on mine, but I can do it with the tongue maybe. So let me build up some color here, some texture. Okay, so let's say I have a color like this. I'm going to do this in a separate layer. And I want to smooth out the tongue. And so I had really dark shadows around it. Now I got to kind of smooth that out. Instead of doing it with just selecting lots of colors with the brush, I could use this smudge tool, which you'll find above the dodge and burn. It's underneath blur and sharpen, smudge tool. And the smudge tool works like a brush, but the icon for it is a little finger, like you're smudging it. And what it will do is it will pick up the pixels and blend them together. It's not going to create any new pixels. It's just going to soften the edges and kind of smear them together. So I want you to look at the difference between this pixel quality, that's smudged, and this pixel quality, that's blended. So when you want that really, really soft-edged, kind of blurry quality, which some people like in kind of skin tones, you can use the smudge tool rather than just the painting. Okay. And you can use it to kind of push edges around. So I just put kind of highlights around that tongue. But if I wanted to push them around, I can use that smudge tool now and just push the edge of those off to one side. So it can be a really helpful tool to use and very common in digital painting.